Bing, 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 bing. Go.
What's up, guys?
Hi. Let me just
Hi.
do some adjusting. Hi. Nice to see you again.
Nice to
we
see
got a
you.
good squad right now.
We're gonna wait like 2 minutes for some folks to log in, and then we're gonna get started. Can you guys hear us? Okay.
Yeah, sound good. Do we sound okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Sick. You guys look official.
Dude, we're
These are
nerds. Nerding out
I love
right now.
like Patrick has his gaming headphones, and then these are actually our sons. So I'm wearing children's headphones, but our son's head is like bigger than most adults. So
What?
I never would
regular
guess.
adult headphones.
okay, so they're regular. I don't know, but
Yeah.
they seem smaller than yours.
Kids do have big heads, you know, short arms, big heads.
They do, yeah. Unfortunately for me, both of our kids were like 95th percentile heads.
I remember
But-
learning actually that is the reason that they squat so well is because their head displaces their center of gravity. It has nothing to do with like mobile ankles or anything like that,
Right.
apparently.
That's
Good.
funny.
Head to body ratio.
I remember when our first kid was born, I was like, oh my God, she can't reach over her head, like straight arms, like it's like
Yeah,
here.
they're like apparently Roxy, our dog's joining the call. She's
Oh, yeah,
strategically
there you go.
sitting right
Girl, that's so nice.
in the middle.
Uh,
She's almost 10, still as insane as 10 years ago.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, we're so happy to have you guys, Grayson and Sarah Strange. Welcome.
Thanks.
Um,
Happy to be here.
Yep.
So we're gonna get into it here, and some more people might log in, and that's totally fine. We kind of like drafted some questions, and also for any of you guys who were tuned in, if you want to ask further questions at any time, feel free to unmute, or if you feel more comfortable like dropping it in the chat, you can do that. So first off, we wanted to ask you guys just to talk a little bit about your story, if you will, how you got into training and what your background is, and then we'll go from there.
Cool. You want to go first?
Sure.
Go.
Mine's the longest, so because I'm older. Anyways, I started off, I did classical ballet for 13 years. That was kind of the primer. And then from there, it was just kind of a means of sort of finding the thing. So went to triathlons for a while, and then some martial arts, and then got in heavily into yoga, and then became a Pilates instructor. So for about 5 years in Boulder, Colorado, I was working at the U.S. Physical Therapy Center for the official physical therapy center for the U.S. ski and snowboard team, and also at the time it was the Postal Service cycling team, which was a really cool place to learn things, but really hard place to work because Boulder, everyone is either a Pilates instructor, a yoga instructor, or a trust fund or a tech person. That's like the only 4 options for living in Boulder. So very competitive in all 4 markets. And then I got into CrossFit basically because my chiropractor kept telling me, like, you need to start doing some strength training because your yoga was killing me. Basically, my back was a total disaster from too much hyper extension in my lumbar. So then I met Grayson. I joined Grayson's CrossFit gym, his first CrossFit gym, where we were doing silly things. That was like the beginning of learning about how not to hurt people and strength and conditioning.
It's the early days.
The early days, yep. Like my first CrossFit workout was Murph. So, it's one of those like funny places. So then we opened a CrossFit gym together. After that, also in Denver, and then we wound up moving to work for Rob Wolf at NorCal Strength and Conditioning, and then after he sold, Yeah, it was great. So the whole like learning curve on how to, you know, basically trying to do CrossFit better. And then eventually that just wound up leading to completely abandoning CrossFit. But there's still some really good things there. And we both, you know, respect a lot about it, and tried to retain the things that we thought made CrossFit special, and then get rid of the things that we thought is essentially why CrossFit's probably falling apart right now, other than Greg Glassman's bad comments. But then we started our own gym, Basis Health and Performance, and that's where we really tried to integrate everything that we were passionate about. The heart rate monitored conditioning, you know, so basically like controlling your conditioning and having some sort of a roadmap versus just like CrossFit, you know, insanity all the time. So we worked with all these different heart rate zones and basically trying to develop a really broadband engine, and it made a huge difference. It was super eye-opening, finally using heart rate monitor and training like zone 2 and then true intervals and everything in between. And then the kin stretch, you know, like was a huge thing for us. Started doing that at NorCal, and it changed so many things. And when we finally, it was a hard sell though in NorCal, because they had been through so many like evolutions and attempted changes at that gym that they were a little bit resistant. So when we started our own place, it was much easier to just say like, this is the way to do things. So we started to go with movement prerequisites over exercise standards. And lo and behold, our clients the injuries were like dramatically lowered. I mean, they really did turn into those like typical random injuries people get, you know, like where they were probably more so getting injured out of the gym than in the gym. Yeah. And then we moved to New York, and now we're doing a personal training studio.
And online stuff.
Yeah. And I
As you
do,
know.
I do
From your
nutrition
house,
as well.
right?
That's also been like a second layer of this whole thing. So yeah.
All right.
What else do you want to know?
Cool.
Let's
So-
hear
so
from
much,
you, Grayson.
So much.
What's your start?
My story is less glamorous for sure. I
don't know. You have a pretty glamorous
yeah, maybe.
one job thing.
Maybe.
Was pretty cool.
I really I never played sports. I never really did much athletic stuff. I really liked skateboarding and playing video games. So those were definitely my two things. Yes.
Yes. Squat up, man.
I love doing those things now. But you know, when I got into high school, I felt very intimidated. Like I went to a little Waldorf private school for my kindergarten and schooling stuff. So I went to a regular public school in downtown Denver. And I just remember feeling like
In 8th grade.
yeah, until 8th grade. So when I went to high school, I just felt like I had to like play sports and regular gym classes, and I hadn't done any of that stuff. And I just felt like I'm such a loser at this stuff. You know, I just felt very uncomfortable and out of place. And as soon as I could get out of gym class, my second semester, I took a weightlifting class, and I really got into weight training. And so I just, you know, that was sort of when I started working out, and I had no idea what I was doing. I did bench press and bicep curls, and I did that all the way through high school. In college, I was a co-ed cheerleader randomly.
Nice.
Cool.
So was my brother.
Not because I liked sports, but I really liked the stunting stuff, and it got me into some weightlifting stuff. And eventually I was a co-ed cheerleader for the Denver Nuggets, the basketball team there, randomly, because it was a paid cheerleading job. And so I was like, I get to do this. And paid.
Be glamorous. There's some
That's-
glamour.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, I'm sensing some glamour here.
I wish
So-
my brother was on the call. He was a cheerleader at Penn State, and
Oh, really?
same kind of thing. He had never
Mhm.
done it and walked on because his friends were like, "You're big. You should just try out."
Yeah, I mean, basically, like,
Throw some girls around.
unless it's like a really big cheerleading school, like they'll just take any dudes. Like, we'll teach you how to lift weights and lift people up. We just need bodies.
Yeah.
Which is why I didn't have any talent. That's why I got in there. And then, you know, I did that through school. I went down the normal corporate path. I became a claims adjuster for Liberty Mutual Insurance. That's how when I lived in New York. And I did that for like 3 years, and I got into CrossFit at that time. And I was really I was just super into it. That's all that I could think about. And I really didn't like my job. I got a promotion and moved to Texas. And that was when I actually joined a CrossFit gym and started taking CrossFit. And I had an epiphany one day that I just didn't want to do any corporate anything anymore. And I quit my job and moved back into my parents' basement in Denver and started coaching at this CrossFit gym where I met Sarah. And that's pretty much when we meet at the second CrossFit gym in NorCal. And
Then the
now-
stories merge.
And then they merged. That's right. So you've heard the
Yay.
second part there. So that's my story.
And now you guys have 2 girls, right?
2 girls. Yeah, we got Pearl is 6, and then Bonnie is 16 months.
Wow.
Nice, so you're busy.
Wild beasts they are.
So fun.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You guys both have really awesome, unique stories. So that's really cool.
Yeah. I feel lucky to have gotten to this point. I don't know how it happened, but it worked out.
So I know, Patrick, you have some questions.
Yeah, mine will just come in at some point. Yeah,
All right.
they're pretty random.
They're not really that random.
Mine?
I didn't think.
Well, I was hoping we could get to like beard tips and things about Toyotas that you love. I know you got a nice Toyota.
I hope
So
everybody
we'll-
has a lot of time because we could go
Yeah.
deep into those subjects.
We'll get into all that stuff. Don't
We'll
worry.
get there eventually.
I'll let Rachel keep us on topic though.
Cool.
So it seems like as of late, FRC is kind of the focal point of what you guys do right now, which is awesome. So we just wanted to kind of start off with, if someone is new to FRC and bringing that into their life and their routine, what would you say would be the minimal effective dose for FRC for anyone?
That's a good question.
I always love, I listen to, you guys listen to Spina's podcast?
I listened to a couple of them, but not
He
like
has
religiously.
really goes off at one point in the kind of very snarky, as he always is, way about people telling him like, well, I only have like a half an hour 3 times a week. And he's like, well, I'm sorry, but it's just going to take more than that. Like, if you want this is what it takes to get there. You know, like you have to change your priorities. Like, because I mean, this is a guy that basically, the way that he works out is all day. Like he has
Right.
movement all day. It's that important to him. And he's like, there's so many things that I have to do. There's no way I can get it into this small chunk of time. Also, there's another good quote by this lady that I follow, Katie Bowman. You guys know who that is?
I don't think so.
She's pretty cool. She's a biomechanist, and she's super into like how movement affects you on a cellular level. So like when you lose capacity, when you lose muscle length, you lose capillary bed, you lose oxygen, like your heart has to pump. All of this like cascading effects of losing movement, and that your daily movement should be so varied, like to the point where she doesn't even sleep in a comfortable bed, so that she's constantly forced to roll around, doesn't have chairs in her house, so she can't sit in a bucket seat, you know.
We're not recommending that, by the way.
But what she says is that your body adapts to what you do most frequently, not with the best of intentions. So like if you're just gonna work super, super hard, for a half an hour, 3 times a week, everything else that you're doing has far more input because that's your life. So if you sit in a chair all the time, that little half-hour moment that you're doing, like, yes, it's going to be something, but I think that for us, the biggest concept is like, how bad off is your stuff? Like, what are your goals? Like, are you in a lot of pain? Do you have a lot of problems? Like, you're going to have to reconfigure like how you understand like what you might need to do. Like, so we found that with pain stuff, a lot of the time it's like you've got to get in and do a little something, not only daily, but maybe even like a couple times up to hourly to get that stuff to affect. Otherwise, it just keeps kind of going back. So it's the minimal effective dose, I guess, just depends on like what's the effect, and that can be a big dose. You might have to have a big dose.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing we try to instill with people, especially like new people coming in, because it's definitely overwhelming. And if you have multiple things that you need to work on, I think sometimes that's like just a barrier to get started. People are just like, why? I'm like, my knee hurts, my hip hurts, I got this back thing and I want to work out. So, I mean, from like a minimal effective dose, we definitely tell people like, we want you to prioritize these things, and these don't count as exercise. This is just more movement stimulus. We want you to do cars every day, minimal cars. And then like, if they have multiple things going on, you know, let's pick the top 2 things and get a little dose of stuff on that. You know, like if you can spend 10 minutes doing your cars routine and you can spend 10 or 15 minutes working on your hip internal rotation and your tibial rotation or something, do that. But like, really think about this as how else can you build more movement in through the day? So if you have a job that you sit a lot and your back is tight and your hips are tight, like set your alarm and get up and do hip cars a few times a day. Like if you did your cars in the morning and you did 3 more sets of cars throughout the day, like you've quadrupled the amount of hip specific stimulus at least. So a lot of it is just like, that's kind of the beginning talk. Like you got to do something a little bit every day, and you know, it'll compound over time and get better. But I think that's usually.
And trying to like teach people, and you know, sometimes this isn't always the best sell. Sometimes it's the only reason that we have jobs is because people won't do anything unless we're there saying do it, you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's okay, but it gets expensive. But you know, the reality is that like you got to start doing some homework. You know, like you have to learn some of this stuff and take over a little bit to an extent, and work on these things on your own. And you can tell, like you all know, like you have clients that do their homework and you're like, yes, you're progressing, you know. And then the other ones that just show up and they're like, I want a kick-ass workout. You're like, well, your hip is still a disaster. Did you do anything? No, you know. And I'm guilty of that too. Like I have like a neck disaster that I'm not working on because I have other things I want to do and my neck is torturing me and I don't have time to get to my neck, you know. But that's kind of the ultimate goal is getting people to understand like, there's all these things like that we want you to do on your own. You come and work with us, but like you got to start to take ownership of your own body and responsibility for these things that are falling apart, and like learn how to take some of this stuff with you and like, you know, be responsible body carrier.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people have an easy grasp of like, if I want to work out and get in shape, like I have to go work out and do that. But I think a lot of the time they miss that idea with like, my back hurts and I need to do some stuff for my back every day. That's not really like exercise per se. Like you don't need to go do more deadlifts to make your back better. We need to do just some back stuff that you need to do. So a lot of it is just really getting people to understand, like, I just need more movement variability throughout the day.
Yeah,
which
nutrition.
is hard.
It's like nutrition for your body, because like the regular human lifestyle, zero attention to your body. Like what most people do from the point they wake up to the point they go to bed 7 days a week is nothing to do with making their body any better. It just is like getting up, moving around, taking care of your laundry and your kids and your job. And it's like a vehicle, but they're not caring for it and improving. And like when you're a little kid, that goes okay. But as you get older, that starts to go terribly wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
body-
really funny that you just said that, the nutrition thing about movement, because Camden's been telling us a little bit about his PE schedule. And like you said, it goes okay for these kids, but it's, from what it sounds like, they have PE once a week.
Yeah. I mean, they
And
have recess
PE
every day.
rotates with art and music and STEM and a couple other subjects. And so I was just thinking about this over the last day. And I think sort of what you're talking about here with nutrition is that folks maybe view movement as an area of study or like an area of interest, when it actually should be right there with like lunchtime and recess, or, you know, like recess is sort of movement, but it's like there are certain things that people need on a
Right.
daily basis, not just that they're pursuing an interest in or something like that.
Yeah, well, we figured out like brushing our teeth, you know, and trying not to eat sugar all day. Like we've kind of figured those things out, but there's so much more to do with your body to take care of it than brushing your teeth. You know?
Mhm. Yeah, that's
Wow.
really
Washing your
interesting.
butt, you know, I mean, there's like a lot of
I have some questions sort of like that branched off the minimal dose thing about when we talked to you guys yesterday, we talked about prerequisites and stuff like that. And maybe this is in the FRA, and so we haven't done FRA yet. But can you guys kind of talk about maybe for some bigger joints, let's say like hips, shoulders, ankles, what the prerequisites are? Let's just call it for normal human living. You know, not necessarily prerequisites for a
Athletes.
basketball player or a tennis player, but normal human living? And then how do you guys determine what the deficits are against the expected prerequisite?
Yeah. So, like, I mean, obviously, like the more demanding stuff you want to do, the higher the prerequisites go up there a little bit. And there's not necessarily like a standard, you need exactly this amount of hip internal rotation. A lot of it comes down to a little bit of nuance as far as like, if we look at hip, so I can get my leg up here. If we look at internal and external rotation, like usually it's pretty obvious that somebody's missing internal rotation. But there's the other components that make up a big portion of that are like, how much do you have range of motion through both ranges of that internal and external rotation? Is there a lot of one and less of the other? So that's kind of one, like how balanced is it? The second one is how well can somebody control it? Because sometimes you see people who look like they have good internal rotation, but to do that, there's a lot of other pelvic movement and stuff. So it kind of comes down to like, do you at least have some internal rotation for the hip? And if they have a discrepancy of one, it's always the focus to train the other thing and then learning how to control that better. So I think that's just the general description, because they just don't have those guidelines established, but usually it's pretty clear, I'm sure, as you know, that there's always going to be some kind of discrepancy there, whether it's just range of motion or controlling that movement, how much they're coupling movements together with other body parts. That seems to be the biggest one. I mean, it's funny too, because it when you ask people like what they're doing, and how they're feeling all the time, like somebody who every time they sit in the car, like, yeah, whenever I get in the car, my hips, like, they just lock up, my low back locks up. It's almost always the case that person has very limited hip rotation, one way or the other, which is going to affect all of those other linear planes of motion. Or somebody who just like, every time I deadlift, my back blows out. And you're like, oh, your low back is like a popsicle stick. It doesn't have any flexion or extension. It's always a very telling story when you go to look at some of that stuff. So I think that's the kind of the general way that we approach it.
Yeah. I mean, the FRA, they kind of say like, you need a certain amount, like, it needs to rotate to a reasonable degree. Otherwise it's just a joint, like you don't have a shoulder if it doesn't have, at least like vertical external rotation and, whatever that is.
A fair amount.
Yeah, a fair amount.
Yeah. Like if this is what you have, that's not enough, but mostly that's just because people are going to do something in their life. Like whether or not you're an athlete, you're still going to go help your friend move or reach for something or put something away or rotate and pick something up or something that you haven't trained at all for, and if you don't have the joint space, especially in your spine, that's very easy to freak your spine out and go into muscle splinting. So, they basically qualify joint space. So if you have any joint capsules that don't have any rotation, you don't really have a functioning joint capsule. So they kind of X that joint out and say that joint doesn't work. Like that joint doesn't have the prerequisites to be a joint, the capsule's too tight. You have to restore capsule space for that joint to count and get checked off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think
go ahead. Oh, no, I was just going to say that. Sorry, bad delay here. One other thing I forgot to mention too. Another thing too is, like if it's just somebody who has shoulder pain and they're not doing anything that they want to like lift weights overhead or do pull-ups and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of the time it is just like, well, where does it hurt? And looking at what they're doing and when it hurts. And then, you're often going to see that there's a discrepancy even in how much, if they're reaching overhead, a lot of the time, maybe their external rotation is less than what they're doing to reach overhead. So I think that's a nice way to look at it. Like, what are the things that you're doing and what hurts? And then how does that individual range of motion relate to that thing that you're doing? Because sometimes you get people who they have hip pain or back pain and it looks like they have good hip rotation. They check off on range of motion and they can control it okay. And then you find out that if you try to load those positions, where they can get their leg is far different than where they can load it. That was one that was surprising to see when I first saw it. I was like, oh, you actually have internal rotation. But then you find out that maybe they can't load that internal rotation at all. They have to be like in a neutral position. So again, you're like, oh, well, that's the other part of the equation. You got to have the range, you got to control it. And then you need to be able to develop force through the range that you have ideally. Okay, sorry to cut you off.
Cool.
No. It kind of
What
goes
about,
along those.
Yeah, go ahead, Anita.
I was thinking about like neurological effort. When you can't do something to show your range of motion, if they're if the person's actively doing this, because my son, and you see it in kids, like we were doing these exercises where like the body is sort of disjointed from the upper body and he couldn't separate it.
Sure.
And someone checked it and said, oh, you have the range, you just can't do it. So like,
Yeah, proprioception, motor
Yeah.
control.
so I just thought like that, I think neurology plays a role in that too, I guess, and load in the position.
Yeah.
That's kind of what they qualify. So when they do their assessments, they're looking for, do you have the range of motion passively? Like, can I move you into this position without you doing anything? You just relax. I'm going to move your joint. Do you check passive range? Then the next one is, can you actively do it? Can you move that way? And then sometimes you find that it's not necessarily a weakness. It's just total obliviousness of how to control it. And pretty much everyone, like when you really go through all of the joints, like, like for someone to rotate their tibia, most people, the first time you ask them to do that, they're like, huh, I've never done this before. I don't have that brain connection. So one of the main goals of this training, the FRC stuff, is to basically build your motor cortex and develop the highest level of joint control, motor control, and basically joint independence. Because even if you're doing an exercise where, you're allowed to use your whole body and all of your joints work together and there's some compensation that's okay, it's not going to hurt you, the better independent joint performance you have, the better joint interdependent performance you have. So if you have a joint that's like you're not really in good control of, there's lots of kind of gray area where you don't really know how that thing works on its own, it's going to do better if you do know and if you do have the control over it. So they work to develop the range, but they also work to develop the control. And that's a huge part of it, is just that, like, are these things communicating back and forth?
Yeah.
Like your
Right.
toes are a huge example. Like almost nobody has really good toe dexterity. And technically your
Yeah.
toes can be as dexterous as your fingers, but they aren't because we never tried to
We
do
just
it.
don't do it enough.
Mhm.
I was just gonna say, looping back real quick when Sarah was talking about like X's on the joints. I remember when we were at the FRC seminar, it can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming or like paralyzing when you're going through it, and like maybe it's the first time you've ever done cars and now someone's telling you like you don't have a shoulder, you don't have a hip, and you're like, shit, well, like what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
So when you guys find that when you're assessing someone, do you like force them back to ground zero, or are there any sort of like patterns that you still work on in conjunction? Like would you still take them through squat patterns or deadlift patterns, or are you just like, we're starting
No.
over?
Modify.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the number one conversation that I have with everyone is like, my goal is to figure out like where are the problems, and also we're going to figure out what's going to be good for training right now, because I refuse to ever tell anybody like you just can't do all of these things anymore. There may be some things that we don't do anymore because of that. Like if you have a back spasm every time you squat, maybe squats aren't the best thing, but like we could probably push a sled. So we really prioritize finding, especially for people who want to do strength training, like what's going to be an appropriate way to strength train right now? What are you doing? What doesn't hurt? There's usually lots of stuff that you can do. I just, we really just reiterate, like, we're going to keep training this stuff, but we're going to be simultaneously training for those deficiencies. So you can at least do those things that you want to do. I mean, if somebody's got terrible internal rotation, they're like, I don't care about my shoulder, I just want to squat. I mean, I'm not going to force somebody to fix their internal rotation, but if it's something that's limiting them from doing the things that they want to do, we'll definitely prioritize that as much as the other stuff. But yeah, the focus is definitely on finding all of the strength training things that we can do that are make their body happy, don't cause pain and discomfort.
Yeah, and I find that like in most of the assessments that I do, I'll provide a list of training modifications for typical strength and conditioning movements. So a lot of times you get folks that really shouldn't be pressing overhead. You're going to press at an incline. But a lot of the times it's not both that someone's lacking, you know, so like if you don't have any internal rotation, if bench press is not a great idea. But a lot of people that don't have internal have great external. So, you know, but there's other ways that you can horizontally press without internal shoulder rotation. So you just have to like tailor the training to fit that person's body. It's like, well, I want to work this muscle group. What can you safely do? Like, what do you have that we can load? And then while, you know, we work the mobility into the training so that you can't get away without doing it. It kind of, it all is in there. Like we do supersets with pails.
Yeah, I was just
and
gonna
things
ask.
like that.
Nice.
Yeah, and then cars and like all kinds of stuff so that it just, because it is strength training and it is hard, it's high intensity and it's prepares your nervous system, preps the joints, people recover better, feel better. But that, you know, that it, very rarely do you find somebody that just has nothing to work with, you know, like it's very, very uncommon unless a lot of folks that are much older. I have a couple of very old clients that do have huge problems, like with just no joint capacity at all. And it's like, those people to me are more like, okay, we gotta start with the basics here and like give you a joint. You
Yeah.
scare me. I don't want to like load you, you know, but if you've got somebody that's been pulling 500-pound deadlifts and then you're like, whoa, you have like no hip rotation at all. You don't have any straight leg hip flexion. Like, let's just, that person, you can find something else to do, you know, and then also just rack pulls or not pulling from the ground, like just changing the depth so that you're loading what they have in a safe way rather than basically like giving them a terrible credit card, you know, to work with.
Right.
Totally. Yeah, and I think as you become more advanced in your training, we talk about this a lot with our folks, just like the ability to conjugate the different movements. So if your program calls for some sort of lower body effort, the more skills you're exposed to, the better you can really plug and play different things and still achieve what you're looking to do. So
Yeah, I saw you guys, you had a cool post a few weeks ago about that kind of thing. Like, yeah, I have a lower body day. Like, here's all of my options that I can plug and play, and I'm still getting, you know, like the desired stimulus that I want, but I have all these options. That was a good one. I like that one.
thanks.
That's really cool.
I think that was your Zercher squat.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, we not all the time, but either for ourselves or for students, we have written some. I think Jason, actually, your plan is like this right now, where it just says like heavy lower body effort. So it doesn't matter if you do a lunge or a goblet squat or a deadlift or a box jump, like as long as you could get the effort to the right place, then go for it, right? And like you were saying, Sarah, that movement variability, when you have enough skills and you know the load for each skill is so awesome, because then every session is kind of like it's almost like an experiment or like a test for those different movements. So, and then when you cycle back to one, you're like, wait, I'm better at this. Like I haven't done a barbell squat in 6 weeks or something. So
Totally.
yeah, it's fun. That's a fun way to train for sure.
I was gonna ask if either of you, like, I know Sarah, you mentioned your neck bothering you, but have either of you had like injuries that you've used FRC to improve, and how did that go for you?
Yeah. I've turns out I'm pretty good at hurting myself. I've had 3 pretty good injuries that I've used FRC stuff to treat it. I have one story though that I just want to say, just because it was like my first experience getting into FRC, and it was funny because I had that same feeling. Like I went there, I learned that I don't have shoulders, hips, a spine. I just feel like I'm in such despair. I don't know what to do. I can't work out anymore. Everything's bad for me. Like, I don't know what to do. I got this client in who he had his arm severed to like 95%, and he had it reattached. He was basically like, he was building a house with his daughter in Costa Rica, and he had these gutters custom made, and they were loading them onto his truck, and they weren't sealed at the end, so it was like raw cut gutter material. Flipped off the truck, and without thinking, he put his arm out to try to stop it, and it landed. It was like 300 pounds. It landed on his arm. It cut his arm off. He was flown to Spain and had, like 20 hours of surgery. the first time, and then like 4 more surgeries after that. There were like 10 to 15 hours. When I met him, it had been like almost 2 years since the accident. He had done 1.5 years of PT, and he was right-handed. It was on his right hand, and you know, he had like his arm was attached, but he had a claw. Like he couldn't touch his index finger and thumb together if he tried. That was as close as he could get. So he just had this mangled thing. And
Wow.
like, I don't know if you can help me. I was like, well, I just learned this FRC stuff. Like, let's try it. I don't know. It might work. And we did like a 2-hour session. And all I knew was like, there needs to be passive stretching, and we're going to do these isometrics called pails. So I just had him stretch his fingers and do pails and rails. And it was crazy because he was like, my doctor said that this is as good as it's going to get. I saw like the best PT that I could, that I just need to learn how to use my other hand and be happy that I have my arm. There's nothing else that can be done. So he was kind of like, whatever you do for me, I'll be happy with, because this is shitty. This is all that I have. And it was crazy. In like 2 hours, I mean, we literally just worked each finger, like 5-minute passive stretch, pails, 5-minute passive stretch, pails, and then started moving them. But in those 2 hours, he was able to touch his index finger and thumb together.
Wow.
And he was like, I can't believe it. Like, my doctor said it's just not possible. And I was like, well, here's the gist of what we're doing. And I gave him, I made him like a little homework video showing him how to do it. And he went back to Costa Rica, and I saw him a year later. He came back to visit some family. And, like the first thing he did was walk in the gym and reach his hand out and shake my hand and squeeze it. He's like, look at this. I can use my hand again. And he just did what the routine that we did. He did that every day for a year. And he had like 85% of his hand function back. I mean, he could squeeze, he carried like a little ball in his pocket to squeeze. He's like, I sit in traffic and I do my pails on my fingers. And after that was really, really eye-opening. I mean, it really was.
That's amazing.
Gave me some strong conviction, be like, this shit works.
And you had an MS, girl with MS that couldn't feel her hamstrings at all. They were just numb. And so she had a real wobbly walk, and she would do, we got her to feel her hamstrings doing hamstring pails, and it would straighten her walk right out. It was cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Outside of that,
AC joint.
yeah, I have right when Pearl was little, I was still riding my motor. Like, I crashed, and you can see my collarbone's not attached, so I can just like stick it out. I got a grade 5 tear in my AC joint. And we
had literally opened the gym. The gym had been open for 1 month, and Grayson lawn darts himself off his motorcycle.
Wow. Nobody was happy about that.
Do you still have motorcycles to this day?
I have one. It's sitting in the garage and hasn't started for like 5 years. So if anybody needs a motorcycle, let me know. Yeah, and the doctor said, grade 3 and higher, we recommend having surgery because your collarbone's never going to be attached and it's going to cause lots of problems. And so like I just was sitting in the emergency room and like, okay, they say you got to start moving the day of the injury. So like, what's my greatest pain-free range of motion? So I was like, trying to do shoulder cars, and I decided not to have surgery, and I basically just did cars like throughout the day. As often as I could think about doing cars, I did shoulder cars. And after like a week, I could start doing with my arms straight, even though I had really limited range of motion. And in like 3 weeks, I was pretty much back to doing like normal shoulder cars. And in about 2 months, I was back to regular training, even though I didn't have any, there's no AC ligament. I had a partial tear of the CC ligament. So I had that. And that it was like, wow, my range of motion is the same. I can press overhead. I can do all that stuff. It just looks weird. I can see my collarbone sticking up, but I don't have any pain. I crashed my one wheel maybe 2 years ago. I broke some ribs and a wrist. So my wrist extension was like that. I did pails and rails and stretching and all that stuff in cars, and it's normal. And most recently, I crushed my finger on top of our yoke. Like,
oh yeah, that was so disgusting.
Yeah, sorry, I had to post it. And
it was good.
Yeah, it was crushed. I mean, I was really worried because I didn't have any feeling in my finger, like I crushed one of the nerves, but that's actually back. But I mean, it's the same thing. They gave me a brace when I got my finger sewn up, and like I got home the day of, and I was like, I can do pails like this, and I started moving it around. In like a week, I could bend my finger. I took the stitches out early, and I just did pails on my finger every day because I had a really limited range of motion when the stitches came out. I mean, I could barely bend my finger, but it's totally back to normal. So those are all my injury experiences with it. So I'm
Wow.
converted.
Yeah, I mean, the standard of care for his shoulder AC separation, they're like, take a bunch of NSAIDs, put your arm in a sling and don't move it for 6 weeks, then go get surgery, then don't move it again for 6 weeks, and then you're good.
Well, no, and then
You're like,
the
"Oh,
first
really?"
thing you can start doing, the first thing you can do is a pendulum swing. So you just let your arm hang and just, swing it in a circle. Like that's the advice for treating
But
an
where
AC
people
joint.
wind up with that frozen shoulder, like most people we know that have followed the AC care, joint plan, it's like their shoulders are messed up. Like they're in pain years later, they get frozen shoulder. Like it's such a bad way of healing a shoulder. It's terrible.
Just to be clear from an anatomical perspective, because this is where my brain's at right now, but your right arm is only attached to your body via the muscular connections to the scapula then, right? There's no skeletal connection.
Your GH joint and all of that stuff is good, and your
Yeah.
CC joint, but your AC, your collarbone floats up.
Right. So like my
Mhm.
collarbone is attached to my scapula in the middle of the collarbone, and my collarbone's still attached at whatever.
Right.
What this one
Sterno,
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
To the sternum. Yeah.
But the ligament that holds my collarbone down at the end to my
the
scapula
GH
is right. Is not there.
So fascinating.
It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, like I definitely
Floating
have some,
shoulder.
like what about like farmers carry? How much weight am I gonna be able to support there? And it's crazy. Like when I really squeeze that position, my collarbone actually just gets pulled down. It just goes down and it's fine. I don't know.
Well, and what do you farmers carry? Isn't there like 400 pounds in each arm or something?
No, I wish. No, my best is 320 per hand.
Cool.
Okay, so I think it's
We got to
working.
get those
I think it's
next,
staying in
those
there.
handles.
Oh, get the handles they're so good. They're the best. And they're just the right shape for doing Zerker carries with too. Side.
Oh, Jason, you love the
I
Zercher
I
squad.
had terrible hips that I fixed with FRC. Pretty much, they're a little bit still a pain in the ass, but sorry, I don't know if I can swear on your podcast, but
Oh, you
You
can.
I think it was the 13 years of, I'm not sure exactly what it is. I don't have any imaging on my hips, but 13 years of classical ballet, it's very common that dancers have dual hip replacements. And I think the majority of the damage is done when you're young and your hips are growing. But I thought I'd gotten away with it. And then when I was in my 30s, my like mid 30s, suddenly I was just having really bad hip problems. Like I'd get like dead hip, but where I couldn't like lift my leg up, and stabbing pains. And it was getting really, really bad. I tried different physical therapy and some different people, and nobody really quite like got rid of it completely. So it would kind of come and go in severity. There were certain things where I was like, I just can't do that. I can't do that. But it did get to a point where I think like after I had Pearl, where I was like, I just can't train my legs. Like everything I do, it just bothers my hips. So I'm just going to not train my legs.
Arm training.
Yeah. And these guys had gone and done, they did FRC first, Grayson and our former business partner. And they came back and they were all just like, like, we have to stop working out. We have to do cars every moment of our lives. And I was like, oh my God, you guys like way too much here. And it took me a little while to buy in, and they were like, you gotta do pails and rails on your hips. So I was like, okay. So I tried the 90-90 and debilitating. Like I could not walk afterwards. I did it fine. And then later that night and through the next week, I was like just horrible. I couldn't sleep at night, crushed me. So I was like, okay, this was not a good thing to do. But that was because at the FRC seminar, they don't really give you any like therapeutic nuance. It's all just like high intensity is good for everybody. Go do it as hard as you possibly can. That's how you do it. Bye.
Yeah,
And
10 out of 10 effort.
Mhm.
Yeah, totally.
so that's what we were doing. So I was like, radiate in my like 90-90, and it wasn't a good idea. So I just kept saying, I can't do this. I can't do this. It's not going to work for me. And then when I went to the seminar, I talked to Spina and I was like, what do you think about my hips? And he was like, what's wrong with your hips? And I was like, I don't know. He's like, well, then I can't tell you what's doing with your hips. And he walked away. I was like, super helpful. Thanks.
Very subtle.
Yeah. I feel like an idiot. I don't know what's wrong with my hips. So they hurt. So,
Just keep working until they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
oh, well. So then like, you know, we quit NorCal and started working on basis, and it took us a couple of months to get the gym open. And, you know, I don't like when you're constructing a gym, I don't know if you guys have actually been through the like
They have.
physical.
Don't even
Yeah.
start, don't
Yeah.
even
We're
start,
very
man.
triggered by that sentence.
Yeah, everybody is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Understandably.
Your fitness suffers a
Yeah.
little bit, you know, so like I wasn't doing anything physically other than like taking care of Pearl and like helping with the gym stuff and lots of like back end computer work. So when we opened the gym, I just was kind of not depressed, but just totally like, oh, forget it. I don't even care anymore. I'm just gonna like blow through it. And I had a couple Kinstretch classes that I was coaching, and I just was like, I was just in that kind of screw it mode, you know. So I just started doing the 90-90, and it was hurting me, but I just was ignoring myself, which I wouldn't recommend doing. What I would recommend now is starting to work from more neutral position and training rotation and then building up to 90-90. And that probably wouldn't have bothered my hips, but it might have also taken longer. Anyways, after 2 months of doing regular 90-90s in classes and hurting myself, but then also doing cars and other things, but I'm pretty sure it was mostly just the 90-90. After 2 months, my hips were like 100% better. Like I could actually even run and do things that would normally make it horrible. Like they were fine, and they remained to be fine until I had Bonnie, our second kid, and then now they need
You start
help
over again.
Yeah, it's like back for one, but
But now you know what to do. So
I know what to do. Yes, yep.
I think probably the best thing that we ever did from an FRC perspective was went down to see an FR person. I don't know if you follow him on Instagram. His name is Brian Fox. He is a wonderful person, and he's super knowledgeable. And it was really interesting to get some insight from his perspective. And like, it's kind of funny, like the FR people and the FRC people, it almost seems like they don't talk. They should totally have like a meeting. Maybe they have now, but you know, he's like, yeah, like you don't have a hip. Like, why the fuck would you think you can do max effort pails and rails? And I was like, I don't know, because that's what they told me to do in Kinstretch. Just rails. They're like screaming at me to work harder, you know? And I was like, I was crippled after the FRC seminar. Like I can barely walk. Getting off the plane, like I would have a back spasm.
I think that they briefly touch on it. They briefly say like, this is for people that have like, they don't have pain and problems. If you have pain and problems,
That
go
can
see
rock and roll.
a
right
practitioner.
away.
Yeah.
That's it. Then they
Yeah, but that's
go.
still it leaves a big gray area of possibly
but
hurting.
also so many people, including myself, have an ego. So if they're like, oh, just dial it down, you're like, oh, okay, no thanks.
Well, the other thing is like, if you've never trained your hip capsule before and you're used to working out, like what feels like very low effort training your actual hip capsule might be like a level 13 out of 10 for your poor little hip. And it doesn't feel like you're working that hard, but that little thing has such low capacity that you just don't realize that. So anyway, just going and working with him and then getting some insight on like, you have to have like, some people can't even do pails. They just have to do passive stretching until they can get to the point where they can load that at a really, really low level. So we really like backed off on, because we were just going to go teach Kinstretch classes. Like we should just teach it like the way they taught us at the seminar, because these are the experts. Getting some insight from him was really eye-opening, and it really helped us like regress Kinstretch to like super, super basic stuff. Like we can work on internal rotation from a lunge. You don't even need to be abducted at all. And that's a perfect position. You know,
I think it also ties in because what they do talk about it at the FRA, and they do the FR guys talk about it, but at the FRA, then they go into the gradients, you know, like level 2 pails. Like there's levels of pails. There's not just like all go force, you know, and it depends on why and what, you know, like if you have, basically like they use the assessment to figure out where somebody should be working, and they will admit that most people have no business being in the 90-90 position because it's so deep.
yeah,
you know?
I think Hunter said that he led ours, and he's like, I actually hate 90-90, but it's
Accessible.
Yeah.
Or not
More
necessarily
common
accessible, but
Learning
like,
how to assess
Yeah.
people's movement is a huge thing too, because like Grayson went in thinking that he had a hip internal rotation until he worked with Brian, and Brian was like, because he's like holding you, and the minute he feels something go, and he's like, that's all you have. So he'll
Right.
like do like the leg hip flexion where you lay flat and they lift your leg up, and it's like immediately almost so many people's hip moves down when they start lifting the leg up, and it's like, you're done. That's all the hip flexion I have. So
I had been doing 90 pails and rails on my right hip, especially for like a whole year before I went to see him. And I literally had 0 degrees of internal rotation after a year. And it's just because I was doing it so far beyond my body's understanding of internal rotation that I was just making myself better at compensating for not having it. But that was like, holy shit, I just spent a year training this and it's exactly 0 better. That's crazy.
That's usually the marker to, in theory, to stop doing what you're doing, or just start doing it right in this case.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we just had no idea just because we would go, what's your hip internal rotation? And we go like this, you know.
Mhm.
Right.
Looks-
Yeah,
That's your
that's fine.
spine.
Nothing to see here. We could ask you guys questions like all night. I definitely have some more, but I wanted to open it up to the rest of you guys on the call. Does anyone like have anything specific to ask? You can unmute or type it in the chat.
Jump in there.
I got a question. Can you hear me? I think-
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I saw your post on the daily input for your cells for, I guess it was overcoming, an injury or something along those lines. And
Yeah.
I had a session with Patrick today, and we both have some elbow pain. And this may be a question for both of you. And Patrick and I got kind of sidetracked today when I was going to ask this earlier, but I'm like doing timed hangs and to just strengthen the elbow in replacement of pulling exercises, because all the pulling exercises hurt the elbow.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that is something I should be doing every day, or Patrick recommended doing assisted pull-ups so I get a range of motion, but is that something I want to do every day from both the healing the elbow, but also for Patrick, like the strength training part of it, I don't want to be doing strength training, pulling exercises every day either.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think as far as the whole idea, or what I was really trying to get across with the daily stimulus, is just this, the idea that like your cells are in some kind of constant state of change, and they only understand what they're supposed to do by how they're used, how they're loaded. So if you have some cells, for instance, that just aren't working like they're supposed to, the more that you can give them information, the better you're going to elicit that change. Because I always use this analogy of like a ship in the ocean that's sailing forward all the time. Those are our cells changing. Like the stuff that you do is what steers the ship. So say I'm doing my cars routine every day, that's enough to not lose any range of motion. So I'm sort of keeping that ship in a straight line. It's not going towards immobility, right? But maybe I have elbow funkiness, and the cars maybe are not enough specific stimulus to make the elbow work better. So if I do some stuff for my elbow today and I get that ship to steer a little bit this way today, if I skip it tomorrow, it's going to want to go back in that straight line. So you end up getting this like waggy ship line where a little dose of that stuff every day can start to make it go towards that other direction, as opposed to just keeping it in a straight line. That's really the idea with daily stimulus, although it all comes down to like figuring out that thing that you really need to be doing every day. Because I've definitely had stuff where I'm like, I'm going to do this every day, but it's just not quite the right thing to make that change. I was actually going to ask, only because I've had such bad elbow tendonitis on the inside of my left elbow that like at one point I couldn't even pick up an empty barbell because it just felt like hot lava being injected into my elbow. Are you getting pain on one side or the other?
It's the outside kind of inner inside the elbow. It's really more like a connection, like where the forearm connects to the elbow.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I just call it the elbow because it's in that area. But
totally. So it's more like kind of like this region here.
yeah.
I can tell you one thing to maybe look at with Patrick is the elbow rotation stuff. That was an unbelievable change for me, training elbow rotation, especially your pronation stuff. Like when you rotate this way, that requires all that tissue to lengthen, and if it's really tight, sometimes you could look like you have enough pronation, but figuring out where you can load those positions. So for me, the thing that really made my elbows better was just specifically training for pronation and supination, unbelievably better. You know, and if it's always the other side of that equation is like, if pulling things hurt, you know, you don't want to stop pulling, but finding some ways to pull that don't let your elbow up. Like I love the assisted stuff if that doesn't create that thing. But I think if you haven't tried any elbow rotation yet, maybe that could be something that you could start playing with on a regular basis. The nice thing is you can do it if you just have some kind of stick, a broom, I mean, anything that you can find that you can hold.
What do you
But
just?
what I would add to that for like a daily stimulus would be, so like you want to test your rotation, you know, like you want to have this forearm being at least flat, like this should really flatten out, if not better. And, you know, both ways.
Like
And a lot of
180
people that
degrees.
have elbow tendonitis issues, they don't quite have full rotation. So their little muscles are fighting, you know, to move the arm so hard.
I'll get a little closer
So when
here.
you have more space here, your muscles and tendons don't have to fight so hard to do that. But so basically, like for a daily stimulus, it's not necessarily like a heavy loading training stimulus, or even like a, you know, moderate loading training stimulus. It's more like neurological input to those tissues to chill out, you know, and to also lengthen out. And so those Pales contractions, when you put that tissue into a stretched position and then you resist. And so this is where we talk about, again, figuring out where your capacity is. So like if you're capable of producing a little bit of force that makes things better and not worse, that's where we want you to work. So if you do something that's too intense or too deep and it makes it worse, then that's bad. So you want to find that like right angle to be in, and then the right amount of pressure, and then almost an hourly thing, like dropping in. So for me, like when I get pregnant, I get plantar fasciitis and low back stuff. If I drop in, once those things set in and I do hourly light Pales contractions, it just like, it goes away. And then I only have to do it like every so often, but I'll have to do it every day, every hour for like, I don't know, maybe like 5 days. And then it dramatically goes away. And I think that it's just that like, hey, stop freaking out, you know, like that constant reminder to stop freaking out. And then that tissue just suddenly is like, oh, okay, I can relax.
Yeah. Like when my elbow was really bad, I mean, it was just a whole different approach to the mindset of like, what am I doing with my elbow? Because in my mind, I'm doing curls, I'm doing pull-ups, I'm doing all kinds of elbow bending stuff. I'm pushing, pulling. And it's like, I don't understand why this isn't getting better. Like I could change the intensity, I could change the volume, but it would always kind of stay the same. If I did enough grip intensive pulling stuff, it would just hurt all the time. And you know, I had a big realization when I started looking at the elbow capsule, because how much force that tissue can generate through rotation is what's going to give you better flexion and extension. So you could train flexion and extension all the time, but if you're missing some fundamental amount of rotation, a lot of the time it just doesn't get better, even when you play with all those other variables. So, you know, when I was looking at my elbow, like I looked like I had 180 degrees of pronation and supination, but if I tried to work in this end range by pushing down on the stick and resisting, I would just get like horrible elbow pain. What I found was like, oh, I have like here, this is where it's pain-free if I try to resist more pronation. If I go any more than that, it just gives me like a sharp burning sensation in my elbow. And it didn't take a ton of work. You know, I would just hold a little passive stretch, do a couple Pales contractions where it didn't hurt. And after doing that for a few days, it was like, holy shit, I can go here now and it doesn't hurt at all. And then my elbow tendonitis just started to go away. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a nice one, because you can just, you know, you can sit down, you can do your 10 seconds Pales, do an elbow car, and then do that a few times a day. And that's my my advice there. But yeah, I think like the daily, find the thing that's going to give you the most bang for your buck. Check out the elbow capsule and then try to get that little dose every day. If you do 2 minutes of passive stretching and a couple Pales and then a few more Pales contractions throughout the day, that would totally be enough to make that better.
Yeah. And what he said too, that's money, where you gotta find the angle, you know, like what's the angle where things are not happy and how do I fix that? And it's usually like just starting to progress towards that, and it pushes it out. And in your deepest stretch seems like what you learn at FRC, but then as you play with it, you realize like, then you get really good at that position, but then you move slightly out to the side and try it there. And you're like, oh, I'm super weak and it hurts.
Yeah. It's it's tricky because like, as we get further into our end range, we lose our ability to produce and generate force. So like I'm strongest here, I'm weakest here, and I'm weakest here. But the sweet spot is kind of like, one, it definitely has to be pain-free to load it, like absolutely zero, no pain. But the other part is that sometimes when you're right at that limit, like it's pain-free, but like I have no juice here. If you can't generate very much force there, a lot of the time it's better to go into lesser than end range and just train that position, because what's going to make tissue change is where it gets loaded. So if you're in a position where, yes, it's pain-free, but you can't generate very much force at all, it's just super, super minimal, backing out of it just like a degree can be the difference between making a lot more progress, because now that tissue is being loaded. So it's just learning how to do what it's supposed to do faster.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Oh yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, good luck. I'm confident you'll get it figured out. But when you do, just hammer away at it.
All right.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah.
Any other questions from you guys? If you have something that's hurting, now's your time to ask.
Don't keep secrets. And we all have stuff that hurts.
Dun, dun, dun. Do you have other questions that you wanted to wrap up with? About beard care?
Beards
No,
and
I mean,
Toyota.
we'll stick with the Toyota. I was just curious to hear a little bit about your truck. I think, I don't know if everybody else wants to hear about it, but I know you have an older Land Cruiser, right? So I was just curious the story of how you got it and sort of what it's been through. It's a cool looking truck.
Yeah, I got it in like right when I moved back to Denver. So that was like 2010. When they were totally affordable then and nobody cared about them. Now they're just like ridiculous. And I've always really loved mechanical things. I've always loved cars and, sort of tried to work on them, but I was always really intimidated because I just didn't want to break anything. And getting the Land Cruiser was really the thing that like gave me the confidence to start doing car stuff on my own and just trying to figure things out, because they're like, it's just like really, really simple and it's really well made. So it's really easy you can buy like the service manual for it. And it has these wonderful diagrams where you can take everything apart and put it back together, and like everything on it is made to be fixed. And so, I took it to a shop once and it had like, it leaked oil and fluid from like everything that held fluid. It was just like, it was embarrassing to park anywhere. And I had it fixed, and like, it was like $300 worth of parts and like an $1,800 bill for the labor. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like I need to do this myself. This could have cost me $300, not $2,000. And so I started slowly going through everything. Like what was the first thing was maybe the axle. I rebuilt the front axle.
Grayson had a small crisis after we had our first child.
It might've been part of it.
This was like, I gotta go fix the car. I don't know if you experienced that, but you have a kid and it's just this very overwhelming. Like,
Patrick was in the hospital for 5 days. When
Yeah,
our son
I had a heart
was,
arrhythmia.
our
so.
son was 1 month old and he decided to be hospitalized for
Yeah.
almost a week. Yeah, it happens.
Apparently stress can do crazy things.
Yeah, totally.
So Grayson was like, just, I'm gonna do all, and I mean, it was like all summer. He was out there like on the weekends. There's these funny pictures of like Pearl in like the little bumbo, like in her little onesie, just like in the driveway with Grayson. It was like,
I'd be out there
you're
till like,
taking her right now, but he was just like, yeah, he just totally did all the suspension. I mean, it was major project time.
yeah, I did this. I did the axles, I did the clutch, the brakes, new suspension,
Cool.
top end engine stuff. But then that was like, after I did all that, I was like, well, this car is made by a person. It's made to be taken apart by people. Like I could figure this out. So it really changed my perspective. So now we have like this fleet of old vehicles, and I just fix them all the time. Like Sarah has an old BMW that I did an engine swap on. I put in a faster, more powerful engine out of a new BMW. And then I was like, you can do an engine swap. I can do all this stuff. So it really led me down the rabbit hole of like trying to be a, shade tree mechanic. But it's been
Cool.
really,
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Jason has done his fair share of car work, I think. So
yeah.
He's got like a rocket ship in his garage.
Jason has like the Back to the Future car.
No, it's
You
not
have
a
the
DeLorean.
DeLorean?
No,
No, it's not a DeLorean.
I'm just saying it looks like that.
It looks like. What is it, Jason?
Hold on, let me unmute you. It's saying I'm asking.
Okay. I have a aluminum bodied car that me and my dad and a couple other guys, we designed and built from scratch.
Oh, nice.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
It's insane. We saw it in person. And how long is it, Jason? I felt like it was like a rocket ship.
It's like proportionally the same as like a Corvette. It's like about 177 inches long. Something like
Okay.
that.
I don't know. It looked bigger in real life.
Where does the engine live? Front, back, middle?
It's front engine behind the front axle.
Oh, nice.
So it's about 50-50 weight distribution. 51-49.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew when I saw it that it was a car, and that's about as far as I got. So. But yeah, Jay's the man. You guys should definitely hook up at some point.
He also custom built our slant board that we
Yeah, he built the slant board that's in the garage, so that thing's the
I was
best.
gonna ask you guys where you got that slant board, because when I saw it, I was like, that is what the slant board is supposed to be like, not this thing that's like 12 inches wide. That's exactly what it's supposed to be like.
Yeah, Jason's like, what do you want it to be like?
Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I just told him, I said, wait, whatever you put together, it needs to be something that we never question how much weight we can put on this thing. Because that's the thing, those little PT slant boards, you're like, I don't think I could take big kettlebells or like barbells and stick them on this, you know?
This one that I got said it has a 450-pound weight capacity. So that 80-kilo kettlebell, I'm like right at the limit with my body weight in that.
Yeah, man. Yeah, we'll test that capacity.
That's right. That's right.
Oh man.
Start getting a slope to it.
Yeah.
Well, let me get a picture, which is what I always do. All right, guys. I'm gonna hold up my phone. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Patrick crosses his eyes every time.
We all have our looks for pictures. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I take pictures of myself and I'm like, is that what I do every time? Why do I do that? I don't know why.
This has been so fun. Thank you guys so much. We still have a lot of questions, but we'll have to schedule for another time.
Round 2.
Yeah, totally.
And have you guys on.
That was great.
So thank you so much. You guys should all have their Instagram information in your inbox. Anything else you guys want to sign off with, Sarah and Grayson?
I think so. Just thanks
Oh,
for
yeah.
having us. and
Thanks for thinking
thanks
of
for-
us.
For joining, anybody that's listening.
It's super cool to get to spend some time with you. Oh, thank you.
For
Yeah.
real.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, like I said the other day, it's funny, like you have these people that you see on your little Instagram and I don't know, it's cool to meet people, even if this is how we're meeting. I'm super grateful to do it. So it's cool.
Totally.
I wish we were closer, we could hang out.
Soon.
Yeah.
Well, everyone's welcome down to the mountains of Western North Carolina.
Nice.
Anytime. So.
We'll totally hit you up.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. Have a
hey,
great
guys.
night.
Thank you.
To
Yeah, you too.
Bye,
Take care.
later.
thank you.
See ya.
guys.
Bye, everybody.
Pam, we'll see you tomorrow.